The battle ceased when they watched a human eat the creature that killed them. Part 1. The Enda had been killing each other for 3 rotations when the human ship crashed into the battlefield. Commander of the Dominion stood at her forward post and watched through her viewing scope. The sky above Prime was thick with ash and smoke from the fires that burned across the mining colony. Artillery had set the processing plants ablaze on the first day. Now the flames consumed everything they touched, spreading across the industrial district like a hungry animal. Through that gray haze, a small vessel fell like a wounded bird. It trailed fire and left a black line of smoke behind it as it screamed toward the ground. Adjusted her scope and tracked the falling ship. It was a civilian vessel, not a warship. The design was unfamiliar to her, neither nor in origin. It spun as it fell, tumbling end over end, completely out of control. She could see pieces breaking off and burning away in the atmosphere. Whatever had happened to this ship, there was nothing graceful about its descent. The ship hit the dead zone. This was the stretch of scorched earth between the 2 armies where nothing lived anymore. Craters pocked the ground from orbital strikes that had turned the soil to glass in places. Bodies from both species lay there, tangled together in death, already beginning to rot in the planet's humid air. The dead had been her soldiers, friends, subordinates she had trained and led into battle. Now they were just shapes in the dirt, mixed with the enemy dead in a way that made it hard to tell them apart. The crashed vessel plowed through this graveyard and came to rest in a heap of twisted metal and sparking wires. It carved a trench in the earth as it slid, throwing up dirt and debris before finally stopping near a cluster of fallen soldiers. Smoke poured from its hull. Small fires burned along its length. The engines made a dying whine and then went silent. A ceasefire rippled outward from the crash site. It was not mercy that stopped the shooting. It was curiosity. Soldiers on both sides lowered their weapons and turned their attention to the wreckage. Heard the communications channels go quiet as everyone waited to see what would emerge. Even the artillery fell silent, the gunners watching along with everyone else. For the first time in 3 days, the battlefield was quiet. Both armies had heard of humans. The intelligence reports described them as soft creatures from a death world called Earth. They were endurance predators, which meant they could chase prey for hours until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their ancestors had hunted by simply following their prey, walking and running until the animal could not run anymore. But modern humans lacked claws. They had no venom glands or poisonous spines. Their skin had no armor or scales or protective shell. They possessed no natural weapon worth mentioning beyond their hands and their teeth, neither of which seemed particularly impressive compared to other species. The reports said they were clever, yes. They had technology and tools and the ability to work together in large groups. They built machines and weapons and starships, but clever was not the same as dangerous. Many species were clever. They were clever. They were clever. Clever did not win wars by itself. Clever did not stop a plasma bolt or a blade arm strike. What was a human doing here, on a contested mining colony at the edge of civilized space? Prime was not a tourist destination. It was not a trade hub or a research outpost or a diplomatic station. This world had been fought over for resources, not visitors. There was nothing here but death and valuable minerals buried deep in the ground. No sensible being would come here by choice. The answer to this question emerged from the wreckage. A hatch on the side of the vessel burst open with a screech of tortured metal. Smoke billowed out and a figure climbed through it, moving slowly and carefully. It was a human female, according to scanner. Her environment suit was torn in several places, exposing the pale skin beneath. Her left arm hung at a wrong angle, clearly broken. The bone might have been pushing against the skin, though could not tell at this distance. Blood seeped through the tears in her suit, red and bright against the gray fabric. She carried no visible weapons, no rifle, no blade, no sidearm at her hip. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever was in the small pack attached to her suit. She stood there in the dead zone, surrounded by corpses and craters, and she looked at the armies arrayed on either side of her. Thousands of soldiers bristled with plasma rifles and blade arms. Artillery pieces pointed at the sky, ready to fire at a moment's notice. War machines hummed with power, their weapon systems charged and waiting. And this one small human stood in the middle of it all, unarmed and injured and alone. She did not run. Zoomed in with her scope and studied the human's face. She expected to see fear. Any sensible creature would be terrified in this situation. Two alien armies, thousands of weapons, an unfamiliar world, and nothing but wreckage and death in every direction. The human should have been paralyzed with terror. She should have been on her knees begging for mercy or running for the nearest cover. Instead, she looked annoyed. Her face was set in an expression of irritation, her brow furrowed and her jaw tight. She kicked a piece of debris from her crashed ship and muttered something that's translator could not pick up at this distance. Her body language was not that of prey caught between predators. It was that of someone whose day had been inconvenienced, as if crashing on a battlefield was merely an annoyance rather than a death sentence. Found herself oddly impressed, confused but impressed. Either this human was very brave or very stupid, and was not yet sure which. Then the ground began to shake. It started as a low rumble like distant thunder. The bodies in the dead zone shifted as the earth moved beneath them. A crater nearby cracked and widened, its edges crumbling inward. Soldiers on both sides stumbled and grabbed for support, clutched a support beam to keep her balance and stared at the ground between the armies. Something was wrong. This was not artillery. This was not orbital bombardment. This was something else entirely. The dirt cracked open. Something pushed up from below, something massive. First came a pair of mandibles, each one longer than was tall. They were black and curved, ending in points sharp enough to pierce armor. They snapped at the air as they emerged, clicking together with a sound like breaking bones. Then came the head, covered in black chitin that gleamed like wet stone in the dim light. Eyes emerged next, dozens of them, clustered in groups across the creature's skull. They reflected the fires burning around the battlefield, glinting red and orange. And still it kept rising from the earth. Felt her blood turn cold. Her grip on the support beam tightened until her joints ached. She knew what this creature was. Every officer in the military knew the stories. They were taught in the academies as cautionary tales, warnings about what could happen when you underestimated an alien world. They were the reason Prime had been abandoned for 2 centuries. They were the reason the first mining operations had failed, why the equipment still sat rusting in the old facilities. They were the reason the original colonists had died screaming in their bunkers, their distress signals cut short one by one until only silence remained. The creature was 12 meters long from mandible to tail. Its body was covered in armored plates of chitin that could resist plasma fire. Had seen the old reports, the weapons tests conducted on recovered shells. Standard infantry weapons barely scratched them. Heavy artillery could crack the plates, but the creatures moved too fast to target easily. Its legs, 8 of them, ended in claws that could tear through reinforced metal, and its mandibles could cut a soldier in half with a single snap. When the N had arrived to fight over the planet's mineral wealth, their scouts had reported no sign of the. Deep scans showed nothing living in the tunnels beneath the surface. Seismic sensors detected nothing moving underground. The creatures were assumed to be extinct, dead from starvation after the colonists fled or were killed. The scouts had been thorough. The scouts had been professional. The scouts had been wrong. But here one was, rising from the ground like a nightmare made real. It had been drawn to the surface by the crash or by the blood or by the endless noise of war. Perhaps the scent of so many bodies had finally woken it from its long sleep. 2 centuries of waiting, and now food had returned to its world. The human turned to face it. Through her scope, watched the small creature in the torn suit look up at the monster before her. There was 30 times her mass, maybe more. Its mandibles alone were larger than her entire body. It had killed thousands of colonists. It had driven civilization away from this world for 200 years. It was the stuff of nightmares, the creature parents used to frighten children into behaving. The human smiled, did not understand the expression at first. Her species showed aggression differently, through posture and coloration rather than changes in the face. But her training included cultural studies, and she recognized the human facial pattern. Lips pulled back, teeth exposed, corners of the mouth lifted. It was not a smile of happiness or greeting. It was not a nervous reaction or a sign of submission. It was the smile of a predator that had just found prey. The lunged forward, its mandibles snapping shut on empty air as the human dove to the side. The movement was fast, faster than would have expected from an injured creature. The human hit the ground hard, rolled through the ash and blood, and came up with something in her working hand. A piece of hull plating from her crashed ship, jagged and sharp at one end where it had torn free. It gleamed dully in the firelight. It was not a weapon. It was scrap metal, nothing more. But the human held it like a blade, her grip sure and steady. Her eyes never left the creature before her. The attacked again. Its mandibles swept low, trying to catch the human's legs. She jumped, using the creature's own momentum to vault onto its head. For a moment she stood there, balanced on the monster's skull, the wind whipping her torn suit around her body. Then she drove the metal shard down into one of its eye clusters with all her strength. The screamed. It was a sound had never heard before, a shriek that seemed to shake the air itself. The noise cut through the silence of the battlefield and made soldiers on both sides flinch and cover their ears. Black ichor sprayed from the wound like blood from a severed artery, and the creature began to thrash. It bucked and twisted, trying to throw off the thing that had hurt it. The human held on. She was thrown back and forth, her broken arm flailing uselessly at her side, her body battered against the creature's armored hide. But her working hand never let go of the metal shard. And through it all, through the violence and the chaos, she kept pulling the blade free and driving it down again. And again. And again. Neither army moved. Neither side fired. Thousands of soldiers from two species watched in silence as a single human, wounded and alone, fought a creature that had haunted their ancestors. It was impossible. It was insane. It was happening right in front of them. Realized she was holding her breath. She forced herself to breathe and kept watching. Part of her wanted to order her troops to help. Part of her knew it would be pointless. By the time any soldier reached the dead zone, the fight would be over one way or another. All she could do was watch and hope. The slammed itself against the wreckage of the crashed ship. The impact threw the human clear, and for a terrible moment thought it was over. The creature turned toward where the human had landed, its remaining eyes fixed on its prey, its mandibles spread wide for the killing strike. But the human was already standing. She swayed on her feet, covered in black ichor and her own red blood, but she was standing. Her suit was in tatters now, more holes than fabric. One of her legs did not seem to be working properly, and in her hand she still held that jagged piece of metal. "Come on," she said, and this time's translator caught the words clearly. "Come on, you ugly thing. I've eaten bigger than you." The Charged. Part 2. There was the reason Prime had been left empty for 200 years. Commander knew the history. Every officer in the military had studied the reports as part of their training. The first colonists had arrived on this world with dreams of wealth. The mineral deposits here were rich beyond measure, veins of rare elements that stretched deep into the planet's crust. These were materials that could not be synthesized, could not be replicated, could only be mined from worlds like this one. The colonists built their settlements and started their mining operations and began sending resources back to there. For 3 years, everything went according to plan. Then the attack started. They came up from the ground at night. They burst through the floors of bunkers and the foundations of buildings with no warning. They moved in packs, dozens of them working together, coordinating their attacks like soldiers in formation. They killed everything they found. The colonists tried to fight back. They had weapons, defenses, training. They built walls and dug trenches and set up automated turrets that could target anything that moved. None of it mattered. The creatures came from below, where no defenses could reach them. They came from beneath the beds where colonists slept, from beneath the floors of mess halls, from beneath the foundations of supposedly secure facilities. The last transmission from the colony was a distress signal sent in the middle of the night. In it, a technician described hearing scratching sounds beneath the floor of the emergency shelter. He described the concrete cracking, splitting apart despite being reinforced. He described the mandibles pushing through, black and gleaming in the emergency lighting. The transmission ended with screaming that cut off suddenly into silence. No one ever heard from the colony again. No one came back to Prime for 2 centuries. The world was marked on star charts as dangerous, uninhabitable, not worth the risk no matter how valuable the minerals might be. When the End finally arrived to claim the world's resources, their scouts found no sign of them. Extensive surveys were conducted over many cycles. Deep ground-penetrating scans showed empty tunnels stretching for kilometers beneath the surface. The creatures had gone dormant, buried deep in the earth, waiting. The scouts declared the world safe. They were wrong. Now watched as the beast charged at the human. Its mandibles were spread wide, ready to snap shut on soft flesh. Its clawed feet tore up the ground as it ran, each step leaving deep gouges in the dirt. It moved faster than something that size should be able to move, faster than any creature its mass had a right to move. The human did not retreat. She did not dodge to the side or try to find cover. She ran straight at the creature. Had seen warriors from a dozen species face. In the old records, in the training simulations, in the historical archives that documented every encounter with these beasts. She had seen them freeze in place, unable to move, paralyzed by fear so complete it shut down their bodies. She had seen them flee, running until the creature caught them from behind. She had seen them fight with discipline and training and proper weapons and fail anyway, their plasma fire barely scratching the creature's armor before it reached them. She had never seen anyone run toward one. At the last moment, the human dropped low. She slid across the blood-soaked ground, passing beneath the creature's snapping mandibles by centimeters. The blades closed on empty air where her head had been a heartbeat before. As she slid, she drove her metal shard up into the soft tissue under this jaw. The blade sank deep into flesh that the armored plates did not protect. The creature's scream shook the air. It reared back, lifting its front legs off the ground, and the human held on. She clung to the metal shard with her one working hand, her feet dangling in empty air, her body swinging wildly as the thrashed. Black ichor poured from the wound. It splashed across the human's face and body, mixing with her own red blood. Her eyes squeezed shut against the spray, but she did not let go. Instead, she began to climb. Using the metal shard as a handhold, she pulled herself up onto the creature's neck. The twisted its head, trying to reach her with its mandibles, but she was behind its jaw now, out of reach. She crawled along its back, her broken arm dragging uselessly beside her, until she reached the spot where its armored head met its softer neck. There was a gap there, a joint in the armor where the creature needed flexibility to move. A weak point. The human began to cut. She sawed at the junction between plates with her jagged blade, screaming words that the translator could not parse. They sounded like curses in a language did not recognize. They might have been prayers or battle cries or simply noise to drown out the pain. Could not tell. All she knew was that the human kept cutting, kept sawing, kept working the metal back and forth even as the bucked and rolled. The creature slammed itself against a boulder that jutted up from the dead zone. The human was crushed between armored chitin and stone, her body pressed flat by the impact. Heard the sound from her position, a wet crunch that made her wince. Several of the human's ribs must have broken. Internal damage was almost certain. She expected the human to fall, to lie still, to die. The human kept cutting. Blood ran from the human's mouth now, bright red against her pale skin. Her movements were slower, weaker. Each stroke of the blade seemed to take more effort than the last, but she did not stop. The blade went back and forth, sawing at flesh and sinew, digging deeper into the gap between the creature's plates. The rolled. It threw itself onto its back, crushing everything beneath its massive body. The ground shook with the impact. The human disappeared under the creature's bulk. For several long seconds, nothing moved. The beast lay there, its legs kicking weakly at the air, its mandibles clicking together in what might have been confusion or pain. Then it stopped moving entirely. Held her breath. The armies on both sides stood frozen, watching the motionless creature. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the wind blowing ash across the dead zone and the distant crackle of fires still burning in the industrial district. A hand emerged from beneath this body. The human crawled out from under the creature's corpse. She moved slowly, painfully, dragging herself through the dirt with her one working arm. She was covered in ichor and blood, her suit torn almost completely away, her body bruised and bleeding from dozens of wounds. Her broken arm hung at an even worse angle than before. One of her legs seemed wrong, bent where it should not bend. She could barely stand. But she was alive. She stood over the dead, swaying on her feet, and looked at the armies watching her. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence stretched on, broken only by the human's ragged breathing. Blood dripped from her wounds and fell to the ground in small splashes. Then the human knelt beside the creature's body. Watched through her scope, not understanding what she was seeing. The human used her metal blade to cut into the creature's side. She worked carefully despite her injuries, selecting specific parts of the anatomy. She carved away a section of the softer flesh beneath the armored plates. She cut free a piece of meat the size of her own head. Then she began to gather debris from her crashed ship. Broken panels, torn wiring, fragments of her vessel that would still burn. She piled them together in a small heap and worked at something in the wreckage until sparks flew. The sparks caught on dry material and flame began to grow. Fire caught. Flames rose from the pile of debris, orange and yellow against the gray ash of the battlefield. The heat rippled the air above it. The human placed the meat over the fire. Did not understand at first. Her species did not consume flesh. There were herbivores, evolved from grazing animals on there. They ate plants and fungi and synthesized proteins. The concept of eating another creature's body was strange to them, something they learned about in xenobiology classes but did not truly comprehend. It was what primitive animals did, not civilized beings. The smell reached her position. It was rich and strange, carried by the wind across the battlefield. Something in its brain responded to it, some ancient part of her evolutionary history that recognized the scent of cooking meat, even though her species had never eaten it. She did not find it appetizing exactly, but she understood why a predator species might. Around her, soldiers shifted uneasily. They did not understand what they were seeing either. Across the dead zone, the army was equally still. They consumed only processed proteins. Their food came from vats and synthesizers, broken down into nutrients before consumption. They found the smell and texture of organic food to be unpleasant, almost repulsive. The idea of eating flesh from bone was primitive to them, something their distant ancestors might have done before civilization, something to be ashamed of. The human waited by her fire. When the meat was done, she lifted it from the flames with her bare hand. Steam rose from the cooked flesh. The surface was charred in places, pink in others, and then, with both armies watching, she bit into it. She ate the creature that had killed thousands. She chewed and swallowed, tore off another piece and ate that too. Grease ran down her chin and she wiped it away with the back of her bloodied hand. She ate like it was nothing special, like this was normal, like consuming your enemy's flesh was simply what you did after a fight. Realized she was trembling, not from fear exactly, but from something she could not name. Awe, perhaps, or disbelief. She had seen many things in her military career. She had seen battles and deaths and acts of bravery and cowardice. She had seen soldiers sacrifice themselves for their comrades and officers abandon their troops to save themselves, but she had never seen anything like this. This was something beyond her experience, something primal, something that reached back through millions of years of evolution and reminded her that some species had never stopped being predators. The human finished eating and stood. She looked at the dead, then at the armies watching her. Her expression was calm, satisfied. She might have been finishing a meal at a restaurant instead of eating a monster on a battlefield. She started walking toward the line. Soldiers raised their weapons. Plasma rifles hummed with power. Targeting systems locked onto the approaching human. She was wounded, unarmed except for a piece of scrap metal covered in blood and ichor. She should not have been a threat. By any reasonable measure, she was harmless. But had just watched her kill and eat a. "Hold fire," ordered. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Hold fire, let her approach." The human kept walking. She moved slowly, limping on what might have been a broken leg, but she did not stop. She crossed the dead zone, stepping over corpses and around craters until she stood at the edge of the line. "I need medical attention," she said. Her translator crackled, turning her words into sounds that could understand. "And someone is going to explain to me why you are all fighting over a planet full of those things." Part 3. Commander found herself answering before she could think about it. "We did not know they remained," she said. "The scouts reported the world was safe. They were thought to be extinct." The human looked at her. Her eyes were strange, noticed. Round and forward-facing, the eyes of a predator species. They were positioned to give depth perception, to judge distance to prey. They studied with an intensity that made her want to step back. There was intelligence in those eyes, but also something else. Something patient and watchful and very, very old. "They are pack hunters," the human said. "There are more, many more. They will come for the bodies tonight." She gestured at the corpse-strewn battlefield, at the hundreds of dead from both armies. All of them. Felt a chill run through her body. She looked at the dead zone, at the soldiers who lay rotting in the sun. So much blood, so much meat. A feast for creatures that had been sleeping beneath the ground for 2 centuries, waiting for food to return to their world. "How do you know this?" asked. The human shrugged with her one working shoulder. Before I was a pilot. I studied I read every report, every survivor account, every piece of data that was ever collected about them. I came here to research them in person, to study their hibernation patterns and their hunting behavior. I did not expect to crash in the middle of a war." She paused and looked back at the creature's corpse. "I did not expect to find one so quickly either." "You came here to study them," said, "and then you ate one." "It tried to kill me first," the human said. "That makes it fair. On my world we have a tradition. If something tries to eat you and you kill it instead, you have earned the right to eat it. It is called fair game." Did not know how to respond to that. She turned to look at the army across the dead zone. They had not moved. They were watching, waiting, trying to understand what was happening just as she was. The war had been put on hold, and no one seemed to know what to do next. The human followed her gaze. "You have been fighting them," she said. "The other army, for how long?" "3 rotations," said. 3 local days. We have lost many soldiers, so have they. The fighting has been intense. Neither side has been able to gain an advantage. And no one noticed the ground shaking. No one saw signs of something beneath the surface. No one heard scratching or digging in the night. Thought about it. There had been tremors, small ones, easily explained by artillery fire and orbital strikes. The ground shook all the time when bombs were falling. There had been soldiers who disappeared during the night. She had assumed they were killed by enemy scouts or had deserted in the darkness. It happened in every war. Soldiers lost their nerve and ran. "We were too busy killing each other to notice," she admitted. The human made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was tired and bitter and knowing. "That is often how it goes," she said. You focus on the enemy you can see and miss the one you cannot. My species has made the same mistake many times. Movement across the dead zone caught attention. They were sending someone forward. A single figure approached, moving slowly with arms spread wide to show they carried no weapons. It was a gesture of peace, or at least of parley, recognized across many species. The officer stopped a few meters away. She was taller than, with the elongated limbs and hard exoskeleton common to her species. Her compound eyes flickered between and the human, taking in the scene with the rapid movements characteristic of her kind. "I am Sub-Commander," she said. "I speak for the forces on this world. We wish to understand what we have just witnessed." "A human killed us," said, "and then she ate it." "Yes," said slowly, "we saw, we do not understand why." The human looked at both of them. "I was hungry," she said simply, "and it was there." Neither officer knew how to respond to that. "The human says there are more of these creatures," said two. "She says they will come for the bodies tonight. She says they are pack hunters." His compound eyes widened. "How many more?" "Unknown," the human said. "The original colony reported dozens of attacks before they went silent. The creatures hibernate for long periods and wake when food is available. Your war has provided much food." "We cannot fight them and fight each other," said. "Our forces are already depleted." "No," agreed, "we cannot." They looked at each other, enemies who had been trying to kill each other just hours before. The war for Prime had seemed so important then. The minerals beneath the surface were valuable beyond measure. Controlling this world meant power and wealth for whoever held it. Now they stood together and watched the human examine the dead's body. She was cutting into it again, studying its anatomy with the attention of a scientist rather than a warrior. She seemed to have forgotten her own injuries. "What are you doing?" asked. "Learning," the human said. "If more are coming, I need to know how to kill them efficiently. The nerve cluster behind the head is the weak point. If you sever it, the creature dies quickly. Otherwise, they can keep fighting for a long time even with severe injuries." "You speak as if you plan to fight more of them," said. The human looked up. "Of course I do. They are interesting creatures. I want to study them, and I cannot study them if they eat me first." She paused, considering. "Also, they taste good, a bit like crab. I would like to eat more of them." And exchanged a look. It was strange, communicating with an enemy without words. But they understood each other in that moment. They were both thinking the same thing. Humans were insane. "We should combine our forces," said finally. "If the creatures attack tonight, we will need every soldier." "Agreed," said. "A temporary truce until the threat is dealt with." "And the human?" They both looked at the small creature still examining this corpse. She had found something inside the body that interested her, and was taking notes on a device she had pulled from her damaged suit. "She killed one of them with a piece of scrap metal," said. "I think we should ask her advice." The human looked up when they approached. "You have decided to stop fighting each other?" she asked. "For now," said, "until they are dealt with." "Good," the human said. "That is sensible. You will need to work together. These creatures are dangerous." "You did not seem to have trouble with this one," pointed out. The human laughed. It was an odd sound, high and sharp. "I got lucky, and I have experience with dangerous animals. Most soldiers do not." She stood and wiped her hands on what remained of her suit. "I can help you. Show your troops where to aim, how to move, what weapons work best. But I will need medical attention first. I think I have broken several bones." "We will provide a medic," said, "and in return—" "Let me keep the bodies," the human said. "The I kill, I want to study them and eat them." She saw their expressions and smiled. "Consider it payment for my services." The night came quickly on Prime. As the sun set, both armies prepared for an attack unlike anything they had faced before. Trenches were repositioned to face outward instead of at each other. Artillery was aimed at the ground between positions, ready to fire on emerging threats. Soldiers who had been enemies that morning now stood side by side, watching the earth for signs of movement. The human moved among them, her broken arm now in a proper cast, her other wounds cleaned and bandaged. She carried a real weapon now, a plasma cutter borrowed from the engineers. She showed the troops what to look for, the small tremors in the ground, the way the soil shifted before an emergence, the sound of claws scraping against rock. The first emerged just after midnight. Then the second, then the third, then too many to count. The battle that followed was chaos. The creatures came up from everywhere, drawn by the smell of death and blood. They attacked anything that moved, hungry after centuries of sleep. Soldiers fell. Lines broke and reformed. Plasma fire lit the night like a storm of light. And through it all, the human hunted. She moved through the battlefield with purpose, targeting creatures that had broken through the defensive lines. She knew their weak points now, knew where to strike and how to move. She killed 3 that first night, 3 more the next night. By the 4th night, she had claimed 7. After each kill, she built a fire. She cooked the meat and ate while soldiers from both armies watched. At first they watched with horror, then with curiosity, then with something that might have been respect. By the end of the week, they were dead or fled back to their deep tunnels. The combined armies had won. The casualties were heavy, but not as heavy as they would have been fighting alone, and something had changed. On the last night, found herself sitting near the human's fire. Was there too, and a handful of soldiers from both armies. They had gathered without planning to, drawn by the flames and the smell of cooking meat. "What will you do now?" asked the human. "Your ship is destroyed, you cannot leave." "I will wait for rescue," the human said. "I sent a distress signal before I crashed. Someone will come eventually." She poked at the meat on the fire. "Until then, I have research to do, and plenty to eat." "And what about us?" asked. "What about our war?" The human looked at them both. Her predator eyes were calm and steady. "That is your choice," she said. "You can go back to killing each other over minerals, or you can recognize that you have just proven you can work together against a real threat." She shrugged. "Humans have a saying, 'The enemy of my enemy is my friend,' but we also have another saying, 'Why make enemies when you can make dinner instead?'" She offered them pieces of cooked meat. Looked at the food in the human's hand. Her species did not eat flesh. The very idea was strange and wrong, but she thought about the week they had just survived. She thought about the soldiers who had died, both end. She thought about how meaningless their war seemed now compared to what they had faced together. She took the meat and bit into it. It was strange, chewy and rich with a flavor she had no reference for, but it was not bad, and the look of surprise on his face when she ate it was almost worth the strangeness. Hesitated for a long moment, then she took a piece too. The human smiled. It was a warm smile this time, not the predator's grin had seen on the battlefield. "Good," she said. "Sharing a meal is how my people make peace. It is hard to hate someone you have eaten with." The war for Prime ended that night, around a fire in the dead zone, with 2 enemy commanders eating the flesh of the creature that had almost destroyed them both. It was not a treaty. It was not a surrender. It was simply the recognition that some things mattered more than minerals and territory. When the humans' rescue ship finally arrived 3 weeks later, it found something its crew did not expect. A joint research station, built in the crater where the human ship had crashed. Scientists from both species working together to study the tunnels, and a human who had somehow become the unofficial ambassador between 2 former enemies. She left with her rescuers, but she promised to return. There was still more research to do, she said, more creatures to study, more meals to share. Watched her ship rise into the sky and thought about everything that had changed. The war that had seemed so important, the enemy that had become an ally, the strange human who had taught them both that sometimes the best way to end a fight was simply to sit down and eat together. She looked at standing beside her. "I suppose we should discuss what happens next," said. I suppose we should, agreed, but perhaps over a meal first. Smiled, it was a gesture she had learned from the human. I would like that, she said. They walked together toward the research station, two former enemies who had found something unexpected in the ashes of war. Not just peace, but understanding. Not just a truce, but the beginning of something new. All because a human had crashed on their battlefield and taught them how to eat their enemies. The end.